Welcome to Comic Book Herald's Creannotators. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of Comic Book Herald, and I'll be interviewing some of my favorite creators in comics about specific runs, graphic novels, or series, looking for their insights on the inspirations behind the work and ideas or hidden material readers may have missed. Today, I'm excited to welcome Stephanie Phillips, writer of The Butcher of Paris from Dark Horse Comics. The Butcher of Paris is based on the true story of Marcel Petoit, a serial killer active during World War II in German-occupied France, masquerading as a member of the resistance and targeting Jewish citizens seeking refuge. It's a harrowing account of one of history's greatest monsters and the historical context that allowed for his reign of terror. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining. And first off, can you tell us a little bit about how this project, how this comic book came to be?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. And Butcher of Paris, I would say this is really born from a lot of just kind of historical reading that I do. I really like studying history, and I was reading a book about World War II and kind of saw like really a footnote to this trial that was going on. And I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm going to need way more information than a footnote. So I spent kind of a lot of time following just any source I could find on the case and just kind of following their sources because I was noticing there was a bit of a discrepancy between a lot of the information out there that people were saying was factual, and then I just kind of
Mm.
learned that that's in part due to how little, despite them knowing like, okay, this guy did it, there's really every shred of evidence available to prove this, but he never admitted it, and because he was doing such a good job of getting rid of the physical bodies, it was really hard to say how many people he actually killed. So a lot of what I was reading, some of those kind of one book said he killed 60 people, another 200, which is like a huge gap. So
Right.
I,
Yeah.
I was
A
kind of
concerning range.
right,
For
right. It
sure.
is, it is. But then, I mean, part of that too, when I started reading about the time period of Nazi occupied Paris, what I started to realize was people were going missing on a daily basis. So I wanted
Mm.
to really show that fear and how Marcel kind of kicked up that fear. People were coming forward like, my relative went missing. You don't know, did the Gestapo take him? Did the serial killer take him? Did they actually find a way out of the city?
Yeah.
There was a lot of just unknowns, and so I think that kind of bled into the case that I was writing about, and I think made it really interesting too, which is, we don't know. He got rid of so many of the bodies, so it just kind of made it, I think darker, and for me personally, a bit scarier to write about this as opposed to maybe some other serial killers or other similar cases.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's an element of mystery to it, I think,
Mhm.
even today, that is uh definitely scary. And kind of like you're saying too, the name of this killer, either because I'm American and there's sort of a
Mhm.
true crime cottage industry, right, that has certain names that are like high profile, it's just like
Right.
significantly less familiar, it just seems to have gotten a lot less coverage. So I found the work here pretty riveting in that regard, just like again, like you said, like this range of 60 to 200 people, it's absolutely enormous and open-ended, and it's kind of amazing to not have heard of. I'm curious, when you're writing historical fiction, how are you looking to balance like the history and the realness of what's happening with your own interest in filling in the unknown gaps? So like
Yeah.
inevitably, this is a true story, but it's not a documentarian's account. So how do you balance that as a storyteller?
Mhm. Um, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of moving parts to the historical fiction in terms of wanting to accurately represent the time period and the people that I'm talking about and give some information to the reader. I want them to come away knowing something more than when they came into the story.
Mhm.
Also, telling a story, which means there has to be some kind of fictitious element, especially working with Detective Massu and his son Bernard. One of the big issues is for those characters, there's not, they are historically based, but there isn't a whole lot about the father and son there.
Mm.
So what I was getting about them was mostly from newspaper clippings and a few books and sources that maybe mentioned some quotes of things that they had written that are recorded. But the really father son dynamic is something that I had to fill in. And I played with my own relationship with my dad, and that was, I'd say, fairly easy to write. But
Mhm.
what I have of a sense of their relationship is from some of their nicknames of like him being the French Sherlock and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, having to fill in gaps is something that I try not to do wildly because I don't like to attribute something to a character that they would not have said based on anything that I've read. And if I don't know enough, that's also really hard to kind of justify doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, and about solving the case as well. Like, I think one of the things that I did on the last page, and the reason I wanted to do this, was I listed all of the names of the victims that we know and can attribute to Marcel. And there are many that will maybe never be named, or there were missing persons that couldn't be attributed to him, but maybe were thought to be. So that's why I also listed that, like, this range could be far more than anyone that, or far more than we know for sure. So I want to make
Mhm.
sure that I was kind of clear on the last page that this is, this is actually what happened to him, and kind of fill in that blank. But I only took a page to do that. So I'm trying to also, put down my own interest in being like, I don't want to just give somebody a bunch of bullet points of like a
Yeah.
Wikipedia article. This still is a story. There are some things that I had to leave out. We only have 5 issues, so then that becomes like a space thing. So yeah, it was a lot to balance, and it was a little like a puzzle, like having all the puzzle pieces in front of me and trying to figure out which ones will best fit,
Mm.
while still following, my main thread and my main purpose of writing about Masoon, his son, and the city as a whole, like how they reacted to it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm curious, what kind of elements did you find, like, wish you had the space to fit in,
Yeah.
in terms of moving at a faster
Mhm.
clip through 5 issues? What were some of those things that you're like, I would have liked
Yeah.
to examine this in greater detail?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I didn't do as much with was the French Resistance.
Hmm.
So one of the things that Marcel kept claiming is that he was a member of the French Resistance, and you see at some point in issue 5 he references something called fly talks, which, something I couldn't really get into, is he has this whole secret operative life that he kind of tells the court about using this covert name fly talks, and he has this whole, like, here's what I did in the resistance, but every time they say tell us other people, he says no, I can't, it's a covert group, I'm not throwing anybody else under the bus, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I think that's really fascinating, that and also how he was captured. There's definitely more of a nuanced capture going on than we showcase in the book. When they find him, they find him through a resistance network. He was posing as a doctor and doing,
Mm.
um, I maybe doctor work. We're not really sure what he was doing. They, like, kind
Yeah.
of just found him hanging out, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you're not supposed to be here." But there he was impersonating different people. But of course, when they're like, "Hey, you took on this person's identity," so he did at some point take a. He apparently killed them, though that's up for debate as well, and then took their identity and, like, filled in as that person. So in our story, that's how he gets into the kind of workshop of the taxonomy and the animals that we see at the end. So
Yeah.
uh, a lot of that is based on the very true elements of how he was captured, but we're really missing a lot of the French resistance, which just honestly didn't quite fit or click in a very cohesive way without introducing a host of new characters. And for us, I think that would have made it really unwieldy for a 5 issue series. So
Right.
unfortunately, I think that was the biggest thing that had to go. There's definitely more about his background, his growing up, which we only kind of spend maybe 5 pages in a flashback with World War I, and then kind of some interviews with his family where you hear a little bit about his troubled past. But there's
Right.
a ton more we could have done with that. One of my favorite facts is that he got his medical degree while in an insane asylum,
That's
after being
that's
thrown out
wild.
of World War
Yeah.
One. Yeah, they were like, "You're unfit to serve. Go be in this asylum." And he was like, "Well, now I have all this free time on my hands. Might as well become a doctor."
I'll get my
So,
doctorate. That's incredible.
yeah, exactly.
Holy
So
cow.
like weird things like that, that you're like, this is a crazy fact. I would love to be able to integrate it, but at some point there has to be a decision made about not getting overwhelming for the reader in terms of the historical fact, and keeping in mind that we're still telling a story. So yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, because it's the book is definitely that, there's that balance between biography or documentary
Mhm.
of of, a serial killer, of true crime, but also, like, the historical reality of German occupied France, right? There's, like, a lot
Right.
of detail that you have to give to each piece. I thought it was interesting how, there's the through line of trying to catch the Butcher of Paris throughout it, but really we don't see him,
Mhm.
like, really until probably the end of the 4th and into the 5th issue, I think it
Right.
is, where you really start to, you know, give the actual killer the attention, which I found intentional,
Mhm.
and it kind of segues into the next piece that I wanted to talk about, which is, there's you talk about this in the essay you wrote in the back of issue 1, which I think gives a lot of really good context. But,
Mhm.
there's this moment during the trial where he's the killer here, Marcel Petoit, is like he's like a jokester, right? And he's like
Yeah.
pretending to fall asleep, and the courtroom attendees are actually laughing out loud in the court,
Mhm.
which is, wild. It's easy to see parallels, I think, into how our culture continues to find these sorts of figures kind of electrifying and captivating.
Yeah.
We got Ted Bundy, even like a lot of TV, right? Like HBO's The Jinx, Robert Durst, like even David Fincher's Mindhunter, that sort of thing. Like there's this disturbing reality to reconcile with, I think, what a lot of us are fascinated by. It's not like I'm condemning anyone for being into these genres. I watch these shows too. Is that something you're working to avoid in writing a story like this, like bringing attention or showing this person is too charming? I guess how do you kind of work around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a discussion we had initially creating the story was not wanting to become this genre of, I think I've heard it dubbed like serial killer porn.
Yeah.
We really just didn't, and again, like not condemning people for enjoying those kinds of things or being interested. I've actually heard that there are studies about how it helps certain people that have anxiety
Hmm.
to listen to like podcasts or watch TV shows that have a very procedural nature to them, which I
Yeah.
found really interesting. I was like, that's kind of a cool way to. I mean, it's dark, but like if that's something that's like good for you, that's cool. But we didn't want to be overly gory. We didn't want to overly focus on the killer. We wanted to focus on how the father son dynamic were representative of a city that's trying to function under both occupation while there's a killer on the loose. So there's
Hmm.
two huge things going on that the city has to respond to. And in a way, we wanted the city to feel like it was its own character in the story, showing different places around the city, showing fighting in the city, showing cabaret, which at the time people actually were writing plays or performing short stories about the killer. It became really
Yeah.
sensational in the moment. So we portrayed like a very small snippet of a theater with the Nazis watching, just kind of always showing these people are ever present. And there are two things that just really permeated into culture at the time in this really dark chapter of history, which were, the Nazis being all over the city, everywhere. That's one way people were disappearing and kind of showing like the Nazis want this serial killer because, again, they're not really sure who he is. Like both sides. They're like, is he Gestapo? Is he French resistance? So the Nazis have heard that he is possibly French resistance. So they want him.
Yeah.
But, as you hear from the one guy in the club, he's like, well, it sounds like he might be doing our job better than we are. Why are we hunting him? But then there's this, we don't know exactly what his intentions are. So just in case we need to find him before the French do. And so there's kind of this race between like serial killers and the French to find a serial killer, which is just crazy. So the way the city kind of reacts and explodes in the midst of World War II and the Holocaust to finding this serial killer who has also targeted Jews, but for a very different reason. It's really out of opportunity, I think. Um,
Yeah,
though,
it's like a convenience factor almost, which
yeah,
is terrifying and
yeah,
gross.
preying on victims.
Yeah, it reminds me, it's quite different, but it reminds me of, The Devil in the White City, which is a
Mhm.
book about, Chicago's World Fair, and
Yeah,
I honestly can't. I think it's H something, is
Holmes.
the killer Holmes, yes,
Yeah,
thank you. That same sort of thing, just where it's just like, well, here's this convenient opportunity
right.
of everyone being distracted. World War II obviously magnified because, like you said, you have this serial killer army, right,
Yeah.
of the Gestapo on a absolutely genocidal level. But it like you wrote, I think in the back matter there, it's like, yeah, if even the Nazis think you're bad, Like you're obviously a different breed of monster. Like it's
Yeah.
something else entirely. Um, I'm a little curious about it. In some of the themes that you raise here, I think are there's obviously like the complexity of this killer using the war as
Mhm.
a cover essentially. But then you write about the kind of the complicity of
Yeah.
people, of a city. I think the cabaret example is one of the best because it's, this sensationalizing this current active like terror as,
Right.
a song and dance routine. And again, like there's modern parallels. You can kind of see it. I'm curious, like, and you show too. It's not just, yes, it's Nazis saying, well, he's kind of doing our job for us. But even the protagonist, Detective Masso, he kind of debates testifying against him
Mhm.
because the French have turned around and accused him of aiding the SS. So there's
Right.
sort of like a counterbalance of national pride getting in the way. And it
Mhm.
doesn't ultimately, right? Like he does the right thing. I'm curious what you see as the dangers of complicity at work in this story and if you see them translating to like our own national situation in certain ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems, and it's really hard to critique like an American education system, but in a lot of
Mhm.
cases, you're given numbers, right? Like you make sense of 6 million people killed in the Holocaust, but that rarely gets broken into the amount of different people that were targeted by the Nazis. It wasn't just Jews. And then, from there, it rarely gets broken down into individual stories unless you're reading something very specific, like Elie Wiesel, who I mentioned in my back matter as well.
Yeah.
These are people that I think helped to illuminate very specifically like their own stories and kind of make it very personal. And I think that's really important to do because it makes that giant number something more than just a number or a bullet point in an article online, which it's really hard to take a giant number and make that, like, obviously 6 million is huge and that's not accounting for everyone that died at war. So these are huge, huge figures. So trying to make sense of that, I think, is really difficult for all of us. So
Yeah.
one of our intentions was to really make something that was a little more personal. You brought up Devil in the White City and Eric Larson, who wrote that, and I think he's really brilliant at doing something like that, where he writes. Um, I think it's in the Garden of the Beast, one of his other books, where
Mhm.
he focuses on the U.S. ambassador to Germany, who was in Germany as Hitler was coming to power. So looking at
Mm.
him and his family and how they reacted to what was going on, which is fascinating and a way of viewing Hitler's rise to power in a very personal way that I had never done before. And so, kind
Yeah.
of in the same way, how do you look at the occupation or what's happening to the Jews during the Holocaust and other groups during the Holocaust? Like, this was kind of a very personal way of saying, here's how somebody was just trying to raise their family, and here's how him and his family are trying to get by. But then also on the flip side, you see some people in the courtroom, and this actually happened. It's in the transcript from the court case, where the one of the attorneys says, how are you all just not registering this death? Like, some have no sanctity of interest in the sanctity of life, and the
Mhm.
crowd laughs at him. Like, this is a joke. Like, how can you ask us this? We just watched millions of people die. Like,
Right.
our neighbors. Like, you become so desensitized to it that it's not a condemn. It's not me trying to condemn them for their reaction to this, but trying to say, here's how an entire society can get to this place. When
Mm.
you stop looking at it as an individual matter and you start looking at this bigger picture of, like, all right, well, it's happening. There's nothing I can do. I guess, I'm just no longer going to care when the number goes from 6 million to 6 million and 1 or something. And
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us have stopped really looking at the numbers for COVID, or COVID deaths? Like, each day adding another number, it's like, well, there were already so many. And even, listening to the government say, well, 20,000 is better than 30,000 cases or something.
Right.
It's like, well,
Right.
actually, that's 10,000. Like,
It's
you're not
10,000 people. Yeah.
yeah, you're not making an individual case for why people should care. And I know that that's a really difficult and bigger discussion about empathy, but that was something that we really wanted to try to showcase instead of outright saying, here's what you should do as an empathetic person, we just wanted to kind of show this is something that I think culturally happens to societies when you are put through um, a universal trauma.
Mhm.
And kind of trying to just look at what that does to the society and how they react. And I mean, hopefully we achieve that some. And the court case is really one of my favorites. A lot of what is being said there is actual transcript. I mean, it's translated, so there are a couple variations on it, but
Mhm.
like the line of the smoke from the townhome where Marcel was killing people mixed with the flames of Auschwitz. That is a direct quote as well from the trial.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I definitely did feel like there's something about that courtroom drama and just the
Mhm.
character at play there, where it's like, yeah, this I could read this for a long time. Like, just this, just because of the I don't know, the intensity of what they're discussing, but then this individual's like just absolute commitment to his
Yes.
lie, to his truth,
Mhm.
it's a really interesting balance, and then also just, like, being an American citizen, like, French courtrooms, and just I'm always fascinated
Yeah.
by the way these things play out differently.
And that one
Um
was difficult because we were like, I don't see a lot of courtroom scenes in comic books, and
Right.
they can be a bit static. But after doing, the first, I'd say 2 issues with Dean, I was like, "Oh, no, this is not gonna this is not gonna be static."
Yeah.
And, it's I mean, honestly, it's gorgeous what Dean did with it, but even just the little movements and things like that, the acting of Marcel, taking multiple panels, taking your time in the comic book to hang up his coat, almost like, the way Dean did it, I was like, "I'm just so annoyed at this guy, like, what are you doing?" But I
Yeah,
I
totally.
love the way Dean's storytelling really, really helped dramatize just how much this guy was playing up his role and being on the stand and just being a complete and utter jerk in every way he possibly could.
Absolutely, and I think there's some of the best kind of panel design and layout there too, where it's
Mhm.
showing the rage of this individual, where in once for a long stretch he's in command and he's taking his coat off slowly and making
Mhm.
jokes, and then when Detective Massow gets under his skin, now here's the monster, right? And
Yes.
it's the coloring, everything about it is just this kinetic energy. Yeah, it plays really well. I That's an interesting point you raised, which is like, yeah, courtroom drama played out across comics is atypical because it would feel static. This issue, I think it moves quickly. It's definitely, this is a story I sat down and I read it in a night kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't take a long time,
Mhm.
or feel like it takes a long time, which is a good thing. Okay, so this is a really good book. I recommend everybody check out The Butcher of Paris. In terms of just the work here, but also just like the story is, being based on history here. It's something that is worth awareness, and I think all the themes you raise are definitely things we can analyze today. I think the COVID parallel is sadly very very
Mhm.
accurate. I and on a totally different note. So I've been reading some of your other work in preparation for this, and I'm wondering now, is there an Artemis and the Assassin Butcher of Paris shared universe in the work? Because you're going back to World War II.
I know. Somebody brought that up with me, and they were like, "Do you just really like World War II history?" And I was like, "It's actually not that." I just actually I may have found Virginia Hall while researching Butcher.
Mhm.
Like I may have come across kind of her footnote in the same way I came across Marcel's, and um, for me, I was like, this is somebody that I need to like put on a sticky note and just save her name because I'm gonna come back to her. She's fascinating, even if just personally, I want to know more about her.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of also at the time working on this concept of time travel, which for me, somebody that just wants to do a lot of historical work, would be something that would allow me a sandbox to just go all over the place. And I came up with this kind of interesting concept of, fact meeting fiction, which is something I do writing historical fiction, but
Mhm.
really make that the central theme, which, the question you started with, which is how do you write historical fiction when you have so much facts but also still a story to tell? So Artemis and the Assassin is really just like what happens when those two things very bluntly meet each other. A completely fictionalized time traveling, almost superhero meets
Right.
Virginia Hall, a real life World War II, the most decorated spy in US history. and they travel through time trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's off to a really strong start. I really dug the first 2 issues, so I'm looking forward to more of that.
thank
You
you.
that actually ties into so you had a Man Among Ye
Mhm.
released from, Top Cow in Image. I think it was just this last Wednesday,
Yes. Mhm,
actually, which is the story of exploring the life of Anne Bonny, a
mhm.
real Irish pirate with, again, one of those, like, there's a lot of gray area in
Yes.
what's real
Right, right.
in pirating, I guess, in general, I was kinda looking into.
Yeah.
But, like, in general, you have a really strong year of new releases in comics, and obviously with the pandemic, there's inevitably a major change to the way kind of works get released and promoted. Obviously, the con scene is just what is that now? How has your approach changed, and kind of how are you trying to adapt to having a lot of work in the market? Is there different stuff you're trying or testing out?
Um, not too much. I've kept in touch pretty regularly with a couple of local comic shops I know, at least in Buffalo, and then some that like my parents go to in Tampa. And
Hmm.
just asking like what they can do. I've done a couple of charity anthologies. I know one was just announced for Aftershock, their Save Our Shops. Just little things where I'm happy to donate my time or resources any way I can to help out the retailers.
Hmm.
Um, so I haven't explicitly done anything that's, digital or anything like that because I think my focus was more on what I can do for the retailers involved or somebody else that might be struggling. I know there were some layoffs in the field or, people furloughed and things like that with
Sure.
these. I think from what I'm hearing, a lot of those pencil down orders have kind of started to get lifted, which I think is really nice as things are getting rolling again. So, really just trying to donate my time. I got quite a few commissions, which was exciting. So I got a lot of artwork in the interim and did a couple of anthologies or things like that for the local comic shops. But
Nice.
so far, I think everything in terms of promotion, other than doing more online conventions, most of the promotion stuff I think is still taking place seems like through social media these days.
Yeah, sure, sure. So much of it's going to be digital anyway, just the way things are.
Right.
I've seen some interesting rollouts of obviously there's like online cons, San Diego moving online, DC's doing a thing coming up soon, this fandom experience, whatever that's going to be. I've seen
Yes.
more of the bigger publishers doing like releasing Instagram comics, which I think is
Mhm.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's
So
cool.
yeah, I think it's a positive shift to try and explore new areas of what the medium can be and where it can be accessed and that sort of
Right.
thing. But at the same time, I love local comic shops.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, me too.
inherently, it's fun to me. Is that something you've kind of always been into, or did you like were comics a dream of yours to write for a good long time, or was it something that just kind of fit the bill in your own efforts to tell stories?
I've always liked comics. I came to this from academics. I'm
Mhm.
also a professor at the University of Buffalo, though I've been spending more and more time on comics as as my career. And it kind of I was doing a lot of academic publishing in graduate school and just kind of came to the realization that I just wanted to do something that was more creative. So I was kind of testing the waters for a while and um, just I sat in my room one night and I was like, I wonder what it would be like to write a comic script. And I tried it and I was like, of course I know like that was probably not what a comic script should ever look like, or sound like or be like. But I found other people in the industry to kind of help give me some pointers or tips or figure it out. And I think I was working a couple jobs at the time, and one of the jobs I just allocated part of the money to finding an artist that I could work with to make my first book and putting that together. And that one got shopped and picked up by Black Mask, Double Within. So Man House and I connected early on, and the kind of just rolled together on that story. And after I think we had one full issue, Black Mask was pretty interested in it, and we went with them.
Nice, very cool. What other work do you have on the horizon that you are excited about and want to share?
Let's see. So Tarna has been announced already for a fall release, and that one I'm very excited about. That is, getting to dive very heavily into the heavy metal world has been really awesome. And
Mhm.
just kind of, one of the things we're doing is really kind of rebuilding the character and her world. So getting to be a part of some real universe building has been, I think, just absolutely one of the most fun things I've done in comics. So that one's
Nice.
cool. Couple short stories for DC coming up, and some new announcements coming up probably by August for my next two things. So those should hopefully be cool, fun announcements.
Awesome. Awesome. Looking forward to it. Great. Yeah, this was a good talk. I had a lot of fun reading these books
Thank you.
in preparation. I recommend people check them out. So thank you, Stephanie, for your time.
Yeah,
I
thank
really
you.
appreciate it.